This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hey guys, Jay here, welcome to Eons of Battle. I paint a lot, and I have curated a selection of tools that help me to paint hundreds and hundreds of miniatures a year. I want to go through the 5 must-have, can't live without tools in my arsenal, and the 5 that should be avoided at all costs. Number 1, brushes, specifically junk brushes. But first, I do want to talk a little bit about good brushes. Anything natural or synthetic, as long as it's got a decent tip, it is going to do just fine. And I think a good target to spend on decent brushes is don't go over $10. Anything over $10, I think, is very, very superfluous for what we do. This is the sort of brush that should cost over $10. Massive brush, lot of material. This should be an expensive brush. Our little hobby brushes, I think, should not be. I really like Rosemary & Co, and they have lots and lots of wonderful options. I think this is a $3 or $4 brush, and then this is actually a cheaper brush that I really like, even though it is enormous. I use this sucker all the time. But specifically junk brushes. Junk brushes are amazing and absolutely should not be overlooked. Whether it's washes, paint mixes. Whenever I'm mixing paint, I often will mix the paint on my palette with a junk brush before switching to one of my really nice brushes to pick it up and actually deposit it onto the model. But often when I'm base coating or wet blending, the junk brushes are wonderful. These all used to actually be good brushes, but through a little bit of poor brush care and just really, really fast, frenetic painting of miniatures, I have thoroughly ruined them, but I have ruined them to perfection. I really, really like these rounded ends that they have. They don't really have any sort of a tip, and because the paint has gotten into the ferrule, it actually makes all of the bristles open up, and that means that these can hold an amazing amount of paint. If you need to wash an entire miniature, this brush will hold one entire mini of wash easy. And as opposed to using a good brush or even a decent brush where you might have to do 3 trips back and forth to pick up wash and put it on the model, this is especially important with things like speed paint and contrast paint where you have to really glob it on the model quickly. Junk brushes are wonderful. Scoop, douse your model, and then you maybe go to your nice brushes for a little bit of cleanup work. And because you saved yourself a lot of time using garbage brushes, you still have that working time with the wet paint where you can do little cleanup actions. Do not overlook junk brushes. I use these for more than half of my painting for sure. And anytime like I need to mix a little bit of paint in the airbrush or do anything a little bit sketchy like pigment powders or making my own washes where I'm really getting everything on my entire desk messy, the junk brushes are key. Now junk brushes are incredibly, incredibly cheap, but the next thing on this list is not necessarily as cheap. My preferred paint handle is little cubes of wood with double stick tape. Now, the cubes of wood are great. I have a few different sizes of cubes depending on what type of model I'm painting, but 1 inch by 1 inch cube I find perfect for holding and painting. When I paint, I have my desk up really, really tall so that my arms and my body is kind of up. And so these little cubes of wood are perfect. They can sit on the table if I'm applying washes and I'm trying to be a little bit faster than maybe I should and I'm applying too much wash. I can take the cube of wood and set it on its side so that I want that wash to pool in a certain direction as opposed to always pooling, following gravity and bringing itself straight down. But I find the little cube of wood better than any actual miniature painting handle I've ever used because I can make it do anything. And the way I can make it do anything is double stick tape. Now, the reason I brought up price is because I have used every type of double stick tape under the sun and every single one was complete junk except 3M double stick tape. What makes this stuff so great is the foam that they use is really, really tough. And the glues that they use are a perfect blend of strong stickiness, but it won't tear. It's the foam is nice and strong and the glue is nice and strong. So even when I'm painting Malifaux miniatures with tiny, tiny little itty bitty feetsies, they stick onto here and I can shake, I can bounce the mini around, I can drop it off my desk, and it will not let go. But when it's time to put the model on that base, I can just use a little bit of pressure and pull it off and then attach it, and it won't tear the glue or the foam off. And every other type of double stick tape I've used, I have a lot of problems with it, either the glue coming up with the mini or the foam coming up with the mini. And so little cubes of wood, very, very cheap. 3M double stick tape, kind of expensive. A roll like this is probably $15. You can probably find deals out there if you keep your eyes open. But yeah, if you want to go the, a comfortable paint handle and double stick tape method, which I think you should, yeah, you're gonna wanna use the good stuff. I have ruined many a painting stir stick or multiple surfaces with poor quality double stick tape. So you do wanna get the good stuff. But in saying that, the good stuff, if you don't prime, if you don't stick a mini onto one of these and prime, like you don't cover up all of that tape with paint, you can reuse that. And I've reused a lot of these for like my Star Wars Legion models 3 or 4 times, just taking off a Stormtrooper and putting on a Rebel, finishing the Rebel, taking off the Rebel, putting on a Malifaux. You can get a lot of use out of this tape. And you don't necessarily have to cut an entire 1" by 1" piece every single time. Like if it's only a small connection point between the model and the base, only cut a little bit, and then you saved yourself, a couple of millimeters of your expensive 3M tape. That was all about painting, but one thing that you might not think about that should be on your painting desk is water. And I think the perfect solution for having water on your painting desk is a wash bottle. These are sometimes called tattoo bottles or laboratory wash bottles, and they are essential. If you airbrush, I use this many, many times a day to refresh some of the water in my wet palette as the water evaporates. I just take a little bit of this and I squirt it in there and it's perfect. It's all sealed, and so this doesn't evaporate like the water in my paint cup evaporates. I've often made mistakes while painting, and my perfect solution would be taking that model, running it to the sink and running it under the sink to wash off the wet paint, and it shouldn't hurt the paint that's already dried. Often I can grab this and just hose down my miniature to save me from the damage that I've done with my paintbrush. And so having a little bit of water around in a wash bottle, it's like $2, but you'll touch it all the time. It'll be one of the most important things on your hobby desk is a little bottle of water. And as you can see from all of the years and years of little bits of paint and garbage that have stuck to this thing, I use this on a daily basis. It is super, super useful. And another kind of water feature of my painting desk is a bucket. I'm sure many of you are very, very confused. What on earth, miniature related, would you need a bucket? Well, I need this bucket full of water near my desk for airbrushing. All the time I am switching colors, I airbrush quickly. I go through color after color after color after color. And what I used to do, every time I would need a new color, I would run to the sink and I would wash my airbrush out in the sink. And then I would come back and I would put in a new color. And that is perfectly fine, but that takes 30 seconds where the bucket method only takes 10 seconds. I fill that bucket with clean water once a week, and then I take my airbrush and I'm like, oh, I'm done with this color. Dunk the airbrush under the water, spray out the remaining paint, give it a little bit of a shake, take it out of the water, a little bit of backflow to get any of that paint that's still in the nozzle, spray it into the bucket, boom, ready to rock and roll with another color of paint. It is super helpful. It has sped up my airbrushing game a lot, and that's what I love about it. I can work really, really dirty. I can work really, really messy. I can maybe try a color that I wasn't completely sure of and just spray it on my desk or spray it onto my hand or spray it onto another nearby miniature to see if I really, really like that color. Where before, because airbrushing is finicky and annoying and kind of a time-consuming process, I might have decided I'll just spray this color and who cares. But if I can operate really, really, really quickly, I might do 2 or 3 experiments before I do that final color. And so I think that the bucket is really, really helpful. Now, one thing about the bucket is after you've ruined that water, that clean water with the first airbrush cleaning, it will dirty up your airbrush. So you do have to clean your airbrush more often, but that is work that happens at the end of a painting session as opposed to frequently throughout the painting session. And so I think that is a very fair trade-off for me because I really like to, when I'm painting, I am painting. And I want to just be racing through all of the steps and processes I want to do. And if that means that I do have to spend a little bit more time cleaning my airbrushes when I'm done for the day, I think that that is a very fair trade-off. But big old bucket of water at my feet, cleaned once a week, is a lovely addition to my hobby. But you know what is the most important tool of them all? A professionally designed, beautiful looking website with Squarespace. Squarespace is the best, easiest to use website designer and hoster out there. Forget about circle zone, don't even mention triangle territory. Squarespace is the last shape you will ever need when it comes to making the website of your dreams. They have everything you could ever want to put on your website with all the tools to make complicated decisions really easy. You can connect to all your favorite social medias like Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube with Squarespace's social link tools. And the most important tool of them all, integrated comment sections. Give your audience a voice on your website so that you can get real-world feedback from real-life people, all hosted on your website. So head on over to Squarespace for a free trial. When you're ready to rock and roll, use our code Eons of Battle to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Now that bucket was a fairly recent solution for me, but one thing that I have been loving since my beginnings of the hobby is super glue in single-use bottles. Now that might seem like the silliest thing in the world because you can buy super glue in big bottles and that'll last you months and months. But for me, they don't last me months and months because I am not a clean and careful person. I like to work quickly. I will leave the cap off of that big bottle of super glue and then more super glue dries on the tip and then it just becomes a weird crunchy blob and I keep using my hobby nippers to cut further and further down the applicator tip until I've just got this sticky pile of glue. I can't be careful and I don't want to be careful and keep a nice bottle of super glue clean and nice for months. But these single-use bottles of super glue, by the time this starts to get a little bit gross or it starts to get a little bit tricky to put the cap back on, this bottle is empty, I throw it away, and then I open a brand spanking new, perfect, beautiful application tip, and I get to go from there. It has helped me so much, I find it so convenient, and I can be as messy and as irresponsible as I want to be with the glue, and it doesn't matter, because you know, this will get me through maybe 1 to 3 boxes of Warhammer, depending on how much super glue I want to use. And then I just toss this when it's empty, and then I open up a brand new fresh one. The single-use application tip is wonderful. I really, really like it. I will never go back to a big bottle of cyanoacrylate because for when I work, they just get so messy. And maybe many of you out there are very careful and very litigious, and you make sure that you give, that applicator tip a nice wipe at the end of every single session. You always put that cap on right away. But for me, I like to work quick, I like to work dirty, and so super glue in little single-use bottles is perfect. I really like it. And I don't find it actually costs any more to use super glue like this than super glue in bigger bottles. Now, another more recent discovery for me in my painting is the paint puck, this little pop socket for painting. I have this mug that I like to use whenever I paint, and this just suction cups right down into the bottom of it, and it helps you to rub your paintbrush on it, and that helps knock off more paint. Now, what I find really, though, that the painting puck does for me that nothing else does is help me to actually clean my dry brushes. Dry brushes pick up so much paint, and then the paint sort of does have to dry on that brush. So what I liked to do with my dry brushes was every single time I was done using a dry brush, I would take it to my sink and I would scrub it with a Brillo pad until I had knocked off all of that dried paint and it was ready to go for the next time. But that is annoying to do, and so often, because I own like 7 dry brushes, I will just go through the 7 dry brushes using the current cleanest one until all 7 of them are ruined, and then clean all 7 of them at the same time. And that actually led to me doing a lot less dry brushing because I just didn't want to deal with cleaning my dry brushes. And you do have to get those dry brushes clean after every single use. But with the painting puck, I can clean my dry brushes in my regular wash water, and I just shove the bristles down into that little silicone thing and just scrub them around, and that cleans my dry brushes beautifully. And so I can use the same dry brush for multiple different colors in the same painting session, and it is really no big deal to clean them off. So I have really been enjoying the painting puck, and I like to call it the painting pop socket because it kind of looks like a pop socket, and it does suction down to my paint cup. So it is so much fun to I just find that really satisfying. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, and of course I got it in pink, but these do come in many, many colors. And you never get to enjoy those colors because my paint water is always very, very dirty. Those are all the tools that I absolutely adore on my painting desk, but let me go through a few tools that I do not recommend. This is probably gonna be a little bit of a controversial one, but ultra small paintbrushes. Those paintbrushes that have 3 or 4 hairs on them. I've purchased many of those, I've ruined many of those brushes, I've used those brushes for years and years and years. most of the companies out there have some sort of a 00 ultra tiny paintbrush, and I think they are not helpful. And it makes perfect sense that you would think they'd be helpful because I'm painting something small, I need the smallest possible brush. But you don't need the smallest possible brush. You need a brush with a very nice tip. And you can get really big brushes with really nice tips. The problems of the micro brushes is they have so few bristles, and so they don't hold hardly any paint, and the paint that they do hold dries very, very quickly. For years, I painted eyes with those micro brushes, and I could barely get paint from my palette to the model before the paint had already started to dry on my paintbrush. And that meant that the paint had thickened up a little bit, and you don't want thick paint when you're trying to paint on tiny, tiny eyes. I don't find those microscopic paintbrushes helpful at all, and I would much rather have a really, really big brush or a really, really long bristled brush to hold a lot more watery paint when I'm trying to do really fine detailed work. I think that those tiny little paintbrushes are a little bit of a trap, and you should avoid using them. Another tool I find is a little bit of a trap, at least when it comes to our hobby, is helping hands. Usually they either have some sort of a metal or plastic arm with two little alligator clips. Sometimes they also come with a magnifying glass, but they help you to hold small things to free up your other hands to do other things. I use them all the time for like soldering electronics, but one thing that is helping me with soldering electronics is I'm worried about burning or electrocuting myself. None of those things I have to worry about when I'm painting figures. The helping hands, the alligator clips, can scratch and crush your painting project. Even if you're trying to glue that sword in the absolute perfect spot, I think squishing a little bit of poster putty onto your model is a much better solution than trying to get those helping hands in place. Because unless you buy a very, very nice and expensive copy of helping hands, whenever you get those alligator arms right perfectly into place, once you let go, they're just gonna move a little bit. They're gonna move a little bit, and all that work of trying to get that sword arm in the exact right spot is lost. I think helping hands look incredibly helpful, and the name itself, Helping Hands, you think that they're gonna be a great help to you, but I have never found helping hands to be very usable in the miniature hobbyverse. Also, if you find that you're having a really, really hard time getting your miniatures exactly in the pose you want, maybe switch from plastic glue to super glue, and then have that bond happen almost immediately. Super glue is still pretty dang strong. And almost on every single miniature I assemble, some things I do with super glue and some things I do with plastic glue. I don't always pick one over the other. They both have their place. Another tool that I would suggest you maybe avoid is every single hobby tool that Games Workshop sells. Now don't get me wrong, a lot of their hobby tools are actually very good. The problem comes that they cost 3 or 4 times as much as that product should cost. The Games Workshop Hobby Nippers are at the same price point as the best of the best Rolls-Royce hobby clippers you can find on eBay or Amazon, and they're not as good. You know, you can get pin vices and hobby drills for next to nothing, or you can buy the Games Workshop one that is very, very expensive for the same product. Games Workshop tools might be a good thing to look at to see what kind of tools are out there and what you might want to try out and see if it improves your own hobbying, but then say, ooh, that's a really interesting little piece of kit. Let me go over to a different website and see if I can find the exact same product, sometimes a better product, for a much, much lower price. These next 2 don't buys is probably going to make a lot of people very, very angry at me, but let's just get into them. Laser cut MDF paint holders. Now don't get me wrong, they're good. They hold your paint and they look lovely doing it, but I don't think that they're a good use of your time and money. Now, in the perfect solution for paint in general is paint should come in tubes, either plastic tubes or foil tubes, like toothpaste. It is the perfect thing because it keeps any air, moisture, and light away from your paint, and so your paint can't get damaged. The way us hobbyists buy paint is we buy our paints in dropper bottles or pots. We're giving up a little bit of quality for a lot of convenience. The convenience of seeing exactly what color in the clear plastic, the convenience of unscrewing and dropping out a perfect drop of paint onto our wet palettes, the convenience of it just is a more attractive looking thing than a tube of paint. And those laser cut organizers also play on our brains of, ooh, look at all of our beautiful paint, beautifully organized, sitting right there on the desk. But you don't need it. And I also don't think it's helpful. A lot of people report having a really hard time shaking up their paints. And I think a lot of that has to do with paint sitting in, maybe in direct light or in the air for years. You know, maybe you haven't touched that Escorpina green in a very, very long time, and so that paint has had time to settle. The way I store my paint is in bins. And those bins, every single day, they get a jostling and a mixing from me looking for colors. And that jostling and mixing does a pretty darn good job of keeping all of my paints perfectly mixed, to the point where every single time I grab a paint, just give it 2 pumps and then I'm ready to apply it to my wet palette, where if that has been sitting perfectly and looking very attractive sitting on your desk, it has had time to settle. And that's why I almost wonder if the Vortex mixers are so popular, because paint has, you know, I've seen lots and lots of painting setups where people have dozens of these MDF organizers to hold hundreds of paints. And if you have hundreds of paints, you're not touching all 100 of those colors very often. And so I would say, you know, if you want to maybe take that money that you were gonna spend on some nice MDF stuff, maybe instead spend that on miniatures and games and just get a nice tote box for your paint. You may think, well, but then I won't be able to find all my paints, but you'll be able to find them. You'll know what you have more if you have to search every single time, as opposed to having them all laid out in front of you. I'm sure many of you are upset with me and think that I am very wrong, and maybe I am, but I definitely think that from my experience, my paint stays mixed in a bin. And last but certainly not least, the most important thing when it comes to painting models is really, really good lighting. And the last thing on my list would be very, very, very expensive lamps. Those expensive lamps don't do anything for you. I mean, they light your workspace, but the price tag of the light does not do anything to make that light of a higher quality. You're not gonna see a lot more just because your lamp cost $100. The most important thing is the bulb, the temperature of that bulb, and the proximity of that bulb to your work. This is a Tetra lamp from IKEA. It's about 10 to 15 bucks, and it clamps onto your desk and you can put that wherever you want. Where I would suggest you put it, right here, right next to your head. Perfect solution would be to have 2 of them, attach them to the table, and then have them right there lighting everything that your eyes can see, pointed directly at that desk. Your light bulbs are gonna be so close to the model that that model is going to be incredibly bright. You wanna get some daylight bulbs, probably 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin, so those are gonna be daylight bulbs. The proximity of those bulbs to your work is gonna be what makes all the difference. A lot of people probably paint miniatures just with the generic lighting of their house. And the light bulbs in your house are pretty bright. They're the same bulbs that I would put in those lamps, but the problem is that they are several feet away from your work. Where if you just get some cheap lamps like that and some cheap bulbs, but you keep those bulbs near your miniatures, you are gonna be able to see so much. And you're gonna spend a fraction of the amount of money that you would spend on one of those LED bars. And the LED bars, you can't even, they're usually so overbuilt and they have so much plastic on them that it's hard to move them and get them exactly where you'd want them to go. Because I would want them right next to my head, but if I have to put them in, you know, a top down above the work, all of a sudden it's lighting some things that my eyes can't see, and that's just a waste. So don't overspend on super cool, exciting lighting. Don't get one of those LED bars or those LED arches. They look really cool, but you don't need to light the side of your work. You don't need to light over here. You don't even need to light top down. You need to light pointed from the direction of your head at the direction of your miniature. That is the perfect solution. And anything else is just a little bit superfluous. But you know what is the absolute furthest thing from superfluous? That's right, our Patreon. Over there, we have new terrain packs available every single month. This month, we have the Goblin Rave Cave, a dank, dark cave system that's super modular and perfect for all types of war games like Kill Team, Warcry, or Warhammer 40,000, or any other tabletop war game you can think of. We also make one extra episode of Eons of Battle every single week where we take a look at our patrons' miniatures and give them some ideas and critiques of how to improve their painting. We have painting guide PDFs and host live Discord hangouts. And we have a new tier where you can get your name on one of my Black Templar Space Marines and you can join the Immortal Crusade. I hope you guys found some of these tools helpful, and I hope you don't get too mad at me for saying that some of your favorite tools aren't my favorite tools. And if you guys have some things that I didn't mention, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to know more.